Excel Chapter 5, pages 282 through 285. Collapsing and expanding items. Step number 1. To collapse the courtyard items in the pivot table, point to the collapse button next to the courtyard until the pointer changes to a white arrow. So you want to make sure you don't get the black arrow. You don't want a white plus sign. You want a white arrowhead. Then you can click. Click the Collapse button next to East Pavilion, Garden, and South Pavilion, and West Pavilion. Make sure you get the white arrowhead. The details for these 4 locations are hidden, and only the location items are displayed. The pivot table provides a higher level summary without displaying the category details. To expand all items in the pivot table, click the Pivot Table Tools Option tab. In the Active Field group, click the Expand Entire Field button. The detail items for all levels reappear. The lowest level of the hierarchy does not have Expand and Collapse buttons. Page 283, Sorting Pivot Table Fields. To sort the pivot table, click cell E5, which contains the grand total for courtyard. This is the field total you want to sort. In the Sort and Filter group on the Pivot Table Tools Option tab, click the Sort Largest to Smallest button. The location field is sorted based on the total appraised value for each location. For example, the East Pavilion location appears first in the pivot table because it has the highest total appraised value of $606,414,000. The courtyard location appears next because it has the second highest total appraised value of $206,000, and so on. Go ahead and read about adding a second value field to a pivot table, and then turn to page 284. Number 1. In the pivot table field list, drag title from the field area, to immediately below the total appraised value button in the values box. The pivot table displays the number of art objects as well as the total appraised value. The value box in the layout area includes a second button, Count of Title, and fields from the values box are added to the custom labels box. Compare figure 5-45 to what you have on your screen. Step number 2. On the Pivot Table Tools Options tab in the Show group, click the Field List button. The pivot table field list closes, so a section of the pivot table is no longer hidden. More of the pivot table is now visible. Step 3. In the pivot table, click any of the Count of Titles labels. You want to change the Count of Title label to Count. On the Pivot Table Tools Option tab, click the Active Field box. In the Active Field group, right here, Active Field box. And what are we going to type in? Just count. Just type in count. And then press your Enter key. The count label replaces the count of title label. Okay, that was kind of a long, convoluted explanation to say you click on anything in this underneath count. Just click in anything underneath there, any of its values. Go to the active field group, go to the active field box, type in the name, and press your enter key. That's fine. Alright, removing a field headers, and buttons from a pivot table. To remove the title field from the pivot table, on the pivot table Tools Options tab, we're right there, in the Show group, here's our Show group, click the Field List button, which displays the pivot table field list. In the pivot table field list, click the title checkbox in the field area. The count column is removed from the pivot table, which returns it to its previous layout. The title field is still in the Art Objects table. It's just you can no longer see it here. To remove the field headers and hide the Expand Collapse buttons, in the Show group, on the Pivot Table Tools Options tab, click the plus/minus buttons. The Expand Collapse buttons disappear from the pivot table. In the Show group, click the Field Headers button. The column labels and row label headers are hidden. Alright, reach up and hit save, and you're ready to move on to your next video, which is using a slicer to filter a pivot table.